Hey, my comic book friends. Sleepy Reader Damien here with my comic book thoughts, sort of the past 2 weeks. I was real slow to read last week's comics and didn't have time to do a video of them, and I was real fast to read this week's comics, so I'm all going to try and talk about all of them. Mostly want to focus on how great all the comics were, how great a lot of the comic books are. A lot of great comics. Some that were not quite as great as I expected. And a big standout for me this past week, or past 2 weeks, was a lot of really good color in comics, and some comics that seem to be really lifted up by the coloring, I thought. So that's kind of a growing theme with me for the good coloring, and occasionally some coloring that doesn't quite work, and noticing how if the color had been a little better, the whole comic book would have been better. Yeah, but overall, just some great stuff. I'll kind of go quickly through the ones that were a little less thrilling, and two of them were quite surprising to me. So this is going to be a mix of both weeks. I don't have them properly ordered out, but Baltimore from this week. Great art, great coloring. And this is the very first time that Baltimore's in all these mini arcs or mini series, usually 2 or 3 issues. This was a 3-issue one. It's the first time where the ending of a Baltimore story didn't quite work for me. There's a witch, the witch of Haru or Harju, and Baltimore defeats her, but I'm not quite sure how or why or where her power came from. There's a lot of talk about where her power came from without specifically mentioning it. It certainly won't keep me from buying more Baltimore comics. This new artist, Peter Bergting, has improved issue by issue. I mean, the first issue was good, but his art is really fantastic by this 3rd issue. And the color, as people tend to expect from Dave Stewart, was extremely good. So it's just that there was a little more vagueness, maybe because this is the first Baltimore comic that's not focused on vampires and this plague of vampires, but on something else, some other magical problem. I'm not sure what that problem is yet. Perhaps if I reread all 3 issues, perhaps a future mini arc will shed some light on this a little better, but I kind of expected a little better from Baltimore. It is interesting that they now have a woman joining their little gang of vampire hunters, except they're not vampire hunters. I guess they're evil magic hunters, but of some sort. So, yeah, a little bit of a disappointment. Trees is still good. It's such a slow burn that it's a little hard for me to read issue by issue. I think if you have passed on Trees so far, it'll be great in trade. It's beautiful artwork. There's some stuff happening, but yeah, I'm feeling a little impatient. Even though I guess quite a bit did sort of begin to happen in this issue. So I don't know why. It just, yeah. So it's good. There's nothing, I didn't read anything bad. Saga, the plot thickens a lot. Some cool things happen. I'm still finding myself having trouble caring anymore, and I think that's more because of past issues that didn't grab me than this issue. And one thing that strikes me is Alana, the lead woman, the mother of our narrator, the wife of the guy whose name I keep forgetting. What's his name? We're not showing it here, but Alana is not a sympathetic character. She's almost like a fake sympathetic character. I think she's set up I don't know. She's set up by Brian K. Vaughan while pretending to be... Well, I shouldn't say this. I'm reading a lot into it. That Brian K. Vaughan is pretending to be have an equal view or even like strong women, but really is not making her someone who I admire at all. I think it's still the lack of rooting for these characters. I don't root for these characters anymore. Yeah, so I have no focus on who to root for, and I don't have as much of the colorful bad guys. Some of them have been killed or are off stage. Roche Limit, my favorite cover of the week, possibly the month. Really incredible colors, kind of so-so art. It's an outer space, I guess it's a colony on a dwarf planet where they make this drug you can't get anywhere else in the universe, and it's a decadent uber film noir type of colony that may have 10,000 people in it, may have way more. There's a lot of setup here, and a lot of characters, and a lot of different points of view. So that's a little shaky at this point. Could clear up within an issue or two. But also all the elements feel very familiar, and it doesn't, other than the beautiful coloring, it doesn't feel like there's something different about this than other science fiction stories I've read over my lifetime. But I'll probably give it at least another issue. Yeah. Devilers, if I'm smart, I'll drop this at this point. I still kind of like the idea. It just felt like kind of a weak issue to me. All adventures in hell, a little too much not explained for my liking. Oh, here's a great, cool double-page spread. And there's a much better Joshua Hale Fialkov comic to come in this review. As far as I can tell, Fialkov is doing 3 comics right now. This one, Bunker, and The Life After. And this is the weakest of them all. But I want to like it for that sort of late 70s vibe, horror superhero vibe going on there. Maybe I'll like this better if I get around to rereading it. This is Multiversity 2, which is just called Society of Superheroes, issue number 1. I mean, Morrison is trying to mine the Silver Age and the Golden Age, but the characterization here and the story here just seemed too simplistic. I really wanted to like it. I really liked the idea of Dr. Fate as a Doc Savage-like character, but I didn't feel like there was any meat to the bones. I didn't feel like there was any atmosphere captured. And so I just didn't get that much out of it. But it was, I mean, I didn't hate it. I definitely will continue to get issues. But it felt lacking. Yeah. So, Future's End last week was great. I don't know, I must have it. Yeah. Had the Joker's face on the cover. I don't think the Joker really appears. Maybe in one panel. That was really good. And it was just in the vein of all the Future's End. So the first 20 issues are one solid, continuous story. Issue 21 does continue from one of the threads, which is following Big Barda and meeting Green Arrow and Red Arrow and finding out they're still alive. But then and everything in Future's End up to this point, the first 20 issues, everything has been shown, not told. You know, the old storytelling trope of show, don't tell. in this issue, the whole issue is devoted to a very interesting flashback or fill-in where someone explains everything, some of which the characters already know. So it's definitely the as you know, Jim, and then we'll tell you the whole story kind of thing. But it's still really interesting. Really fun stuff, really great art. It's very surprising to have only one thread and to just have this kind of massive fill in all the information about this war that we've been hearing about, alluded to all along. But now we get it exactly from Red Arrow and Big Barda's point of view. And so we know a lot about the demise of Earth 2 and the big war on Earth. And it leaves... so I enjoyed it a lot. It's a good issue. Fantastic cover. It leaves me begging... It begs the question for me of where can we go from here in their planned World's End, which is about the end of Earth 2. I mean, we kind of have it all in a nutshell here. What more is there to tell? More than ever, even though I am really, really enjoying the weekly Future's End, I do not want it to become the real future of the DC universe. So yeah, great issue. With that weird caveat that I don't want it to be true. Batman Eternal was really, really strong. Talked about that in a different video. Sirens by the old fan favorite George Perez, who's given us so much pleasure over the years. I was a bit annoyed by this when I first read it, but somehow as it sunk into my brain over the past week, I like it more and more. It has an old school, early 80s feel to it, but it's also like the kind of story that in the early 80s you wished they could tell, with a kind of scope and wildness and more edgy violence and everything, but still within that early 80s vibe, but one that they never actually told very many stories like this back then. The problem with this issue and why I didn't initially like it was it's all set up, and Perez doesn't give us, George Perez, who's also the writer, doesn't give us enough information to anticipate what's coming next, to, sort of at the beginning of a story, particularly in a comic book, in the first issue of a comic book, you want to know, what's this about? Why should I care? Where are we going? Sort of, not the specifics, but enough so that you feel that and want to keep going with them. This takes a little more patience. Hopefully in issue 2, we will, hopefully, it feels like Perez has done a lot of thinking out and has a lot of different threads and characters and stuff going on. So hopefully that will start paying off in the future. It's a bit of a risk. Wasn't there. But as all this stuff sunk in, and I really did love and appreciate all the density of prose once I got over my 2000s way of reading comics and sunk back into that. You would never have actually had a story like this in 1980, but it's written in the way that you would want it in 1980. Well, I should say not completely, because he relies almost entirely on dialogue balloons. He does not do the dreaded caption boxes all over the place that they might have done in 1980. As mentioned, at least by Travis Oddfellow Thoughts, there's something a little off about the coloring. One presumes that this is the colors chosen by George Perez, but it doesn't seem to work to best effect to me with the line art, which I thought was very good. Maybe his line art is a little heavier. He's inking himself than we're used to, and maybe there's a little less rendering and in the black and white art, and maybe that's why the colorist chose or was asked to do a lot of molding of the fleshiness of faces and stuff. But it just doesn't quite work, and I want to be allowed to enjoy the line work more, and not have the color laid over it quite so in so many layers. So I think this is a definite yes for old school Paris fans. Have some patience, but there's so much to chew on here. I'm sure I'll be rereading this issue when I get a chance. Umbral, this is another very good issue. I think I said it before, I think this will be great in trades. It's always a little confusing after waiting a month to read it, to remember who all the characters are. There's a bit of a, it's a fantasy story, and like many fantasy novels, there's a sense of the characters going on a journey and going through different lands and meeting different people and stuff like that. And as such, that's a kind of a less focused story than we're used to in a lot of comics. So it makes it a very different read, and it makes it a little less focused on character. But I suspect that if I read all the issues at once or read it in a trade, the characterizations that are so spread out throughout the journey would come more sharply into focus. And the art, I really have just become more and more of a fan of the artist Christopher Mitten, and his colorist, who's listed as a painter, Jordan Boyd. It's just a little different from anything else I'm reading. It looks really beautiful. It's a pleasure. So I really need to find time to sit down and read all 9 issues that have come out so far together and see how it works. Gru versus Conan. More fun, more comedy, very funny, lots of funny, absurd lines. I don't know why, but I nearly laughed my head off when Gru says, "Swallowing all that water has made me thirsty." Gru gets into this non sequitur kind of groove, and it's really funny. And there's really funny parts with the creators of the comic having their own adventure. And the coloring is wonderful by Laverne. I can never say his name. Laverne Kinderzewski, one of my favorite colorists. I have a lot of favorite colorists by now. But I love Sergio Aragonés, especially in color. Lots of interesting color in Adventures of Superman, number 17. I don't know how many more issues there's left to go. I know that it's been canceled. I think maybe the digital series is already wrapped up and we're just getting it in print slowly. This one had 3 stories, so 3 10-page stories, 2 of which were outstanding. The one that was not outstanding had the outstanding art by Steve Rude, who also did this painted cover. The Steve Rude story was written by that old Superman hand, Jerry Ordway, but it's kind of by the numbers. I mean, it's kind of like a very old-fashioned Superman story, but it doesn't evoke anything special. What's special about it is the appearance of OMAC and the artwork by Steve Rude, but it's just like Superman has an adventure where he meets OMAC Quickie. Just there it is. That's it. There's no extra side stuff. Nothing about Superman's character. Nothing about OMAC's character. But I still loved it because I just loved the art. Steve Rude does his own coloring, and it's a unique blend, I think, of old school coloring with a lot of newer techniques, a lot of subtlety put into the colors that you might not notice at first, but if you go back and look, just all kinds of shades and lighting effects. it seems like Steve Rude's inking may have changed a little, got a little bit scratchier, a little less smooth, but I really like it. And it's still, very much Steve Rude. You can feel the Steve Rudeness of it in every panel. And it gets me thinking, I wish DC would pay Steve Rude a lot of money to team up with one of their best writers to do a mini-series of one of the great Jack Kirby creations, New Gods, maybe focus on Orion or Light Ray or even Commandy or the Demon or something. I guess the Demon doesn't seem quite up his alley, but or Marvel pay him a lot of money and have him bring back Devil Dinosaur or have him do Robot Man. Yeah. So anyway, but then the other two stories were written by, some of the top name current writers. Steve Niles does a very spooky ghost story on the moon with Superman. It was highly effective. It was done by an artist I'd never heard of before who, maybe he's a very indie artist, kind of gives everyone kind of a schlubby look. Even Superman looks like an only slightly in shape guy in his slightly baggy suit. The credits are at the end of the story. The artist is Matthew Dow Smith. I like the art quite a bit. The coloring was by Jordi Belair, considered one of the top colorists now. I didn't find the coloring that strong. It suited the dour ghost story aspect of this, but compared to the other coloring in this issue, like this story by Kelly Sue DeConnick with coloring by Matthew Wilson, who most of us always notice on the Swamp Thing, and who does coloring on The Wicked and Divine and stuff. He just does a fantastic job of coloring the Kelly Sue DeConnick story here, which is drawn by someone else who I've never heard of, and I really liked the art here. Valentine DeLandro. But so, writer, colorist, and artist all kind of kick-ass. In a way, it's a kind of lighthearted rom-com mini-story about Lois and Superman with guest appearance by other Justice League stalwarts. It really makes me think it would be so fun to have Kelly Sue DeConnick do a Lois Lane miniseries also. The only place it kind of bothered me is because she kind of, everybody has a kind of Kelly Sue dialogue style, and for Batman that does not seem right. There's a robot who says filthy human, and Superman says, I'm not technically human, fella. You might want to try another tactic. And Batman says, I'm human. My feelings are all sorts of hurt. I can't imagine Batman saying, my feelings are all sorts of hurt. All right, awkward transition there. My wonderful iDevice cut me off without any warning as I ran out of memory. So I was talking about the Lois Lane, and one of the fun things about that story by Kelly Sue DeConnick, in the humorous vein of Superman and Lois and their romantic relationship in some version of the DCU where they are in a relationship, is that I also this week was reading some stories out of this collection of Lois Lane comics from the 50s that I got out of the library, and they're kind of delightful if you can overlook the sexism, because here Lois, they're both kind of like teenagers. It's almost like Archie comics mixed up with 50s Superman. They're both a bit like teenagers in a relationship, although with all these fantasies about what it'll be like if they have children and all sorts of things like that. But Lois is, well, maybe she's a little bit like Lucille Ball, the childish wife with the husband who is more competent. So she's always getting into these messes, and Superman's sort of chuckling behind the scenes and helping her out and being patient with her foibles. So that can be hard to take, particularly if you think about what it might have done to young girls reading this at the time. But they do have a certain charm, and it was just kind of neat to see Kelly Sue DeConnick's modern version of that. So it'd be great to see her write, a Lois Lane miniseries, maybe. I may have already mentioned that in the part before it got cut off. I'm not sure. So anyway, that was kind of a nice coincidence. I'd love to own just a few copies of those 1950s Lois Lanes, or maybe some 1950s Jimmy Olsen's. They're just a kind of a fun piece of comic book history. Okay, probably the best read of my 2 weeks was Clone 20, and I actually read Clone 19 at the same time. I'd forgotten to read it from the previous month, believe it or not, even though it's one of my favorite books, so shows how befuddled I can be. But just continuing the excellence, and the more you've read of Clone, the more powerful it becomes. It's probably not for everyone, but it's got to be in the top 3 of comics I read, and it's got to be great in trades. They're taking a break right now, so this issue 20 comes to the end of the 4th trade, so try them in trade if you have it at the library or you can buy it. I just think Clone is one of the best things out there. The complete opposite of even though it's fast-paced, high suspense, pop action in that sense, but with beautiful art, with the same artist that's been on it for 20 issues, a story that has a complete, pure through line, consistent from issue 1 out to issue 20. It's the opposite of that experience, like reading Batman Eternal or something, where everything is inconsistent and doesn't fit together. Everything is like a finely tuned engine here. It's actually at this point written by 3 writers. I think there's a kind of a head writer, and he has 2 other writers helping him out. And I have a feeling they're all Hollywood TV writers, although I don't know for sure. But it would be great to see them in charge of a weekly like Batman Eternal, I think. It's pretty brutal, but the most brutal issues were 5 or 6 issues ago. They kind of hit a peak of brutality with the rape with the cattle prod to get sperm out of our hero. But the emotional intensity that comes along with all the violence is it just keeps ratcheting up. It's just amazing. So while they go on hiatus, it will be painful to wait 2 or 3 months till the next issue. But just, I really love it. A surprise for me, I picked up The Life After, thanks to Todd and thanks to Travis. And I read the first 3 issues together. You have these brilliant covers by Nick Patera, whose style is much different than the interior artist, whose name is Gabo. So it's hard to transition between, but actually Gabo's art's very good, and the coloring is very, very good. It's very rich, very satisfying coloring. And Gabo does his own coloring. So it's a different kind of style, this very line-oriented style of Nick Patera. It doesn't quite have as much personality in the line work, but it has just a wonderful presence on the page by the color. And this is a great story by Joshua Hale Fialkov. I enjoyed the trade of The Bunker I read, but I think this is way ahead of it in terms of really satisfying comic book writing. That said, it is literally about God and his son and purgatory and probably soon to be about hell. I kind of am shocked at times at the balls of these comic book writers who directly write about God, about religion, without any sort of symbolic intermediaries or anything. They're going to rewrite their own cosmos, their own version of God and everything. It doesn't bother me personally, but I'm still kind of surprised that they do it. But I'm in for the ride. To me, it naturally feels like something that would be a miniseries, maybe 12 issues, maybe 16 at the most, but Fialkov could surprise me. Maybe there is an ongoing in here. I don't know. Beautiful, beautiful covers by Nick Patera. Which reminds me I need to get back to Manhattan Projects, which I've been buying in trades, but I've kind of neglected recently. But a very, very cool comic book, and I really thank those guys for giving me the extra push to go out and grab those back issues before it was too late. Because it's too much fun to wait for the trade on that. I will wait for the trade on the Bunker. So, another long video for me. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.